The seed and milk of the gods in Vedic tradition, representing the milky sap of the Soma plant, are defined explicitly as a causative agent of cosmogenesis. Also known as rasa, the liquid essence of life, the substance is said to come from a primordial spirit that creates and then gives immortal life to the gods, and eventually also to mortal beings that participate in the gods' Soma sacrifice. A brief perusal of the Rig Veda gives a modern reader the impression that there were numerous creator gods, just as there are numerous sun gods, because a number of divinities were individually identified as the world's so-called unmoved mover. So, this observation would suggest that Vedism and Hinduism were polytheistic religions. On the other hand, once a reader begins to compare the hymns that pertain to this primeval source of the elixir of immortality, one begins to wonder if Vedism might not fall better into the class of religions that we define as monotheistic, the religions that acknowledge a single creator, a single God, because it becomes pretty abundantly clear that the numerous titles of creative spirits in the Vedas actually reflect and account for different aspects of a single Godhead, a single deity. While Brahmanic mythology traditionally recognizes 33 devas and 33 asuras, many verses proclaim insistently that the Aryan pantheon descends from a singular source, a single creator. But this creator appears out of a void under different mythic scenarios and under a bewildering number of names. His titles, or her titles, are both masculine and feminine in gender, as were his/her mythic attributes, depending on the cosmic circumstances. Hymns that detail the subject of creation are often laced with mystical inferences that provide a modern reader with some glancing insights into early Aryan metaphysical thought. But a complete perspective on early Indo-Aryan philosophies requires the consultation of a different class of texts, apart from these compilations of songs, texts such as the Upanishads and the Brahmanas. These works are referred to as the Vedanta, meaning the end of the Vedas, implying a philosophical summarization of what the mythic songs actually signify in the big scheme of things. We cover this topic, the topic of the Upanishads, in a separate episode on Paradise Earth. As for Vedic monotheism, we have already explored how Vedic tradition allows for the conflation of roles and physical characteristics of different members of the heavenly host, in the sense that the gods of the sun, fire, and thunderbolts are often identified explicitly as aspects of the Aryans' famous plant god. We also recall that Soma could be identified as either the father or the child of the Vedic earth and sky, that Soma is described as both the plant sacrifice and the sacrificer of the plant, or as both a dragon and a dragon slayer, and so on. No wonder the Vedas have baffled translators and interpreters over the last 2 centuries. Several Vedic hymns to Soma Pavamana refer to the plant god as Prajapati, meaning the Lord or the Father of all creatures. This title identifies the plant god as the veritable source of living creation. But in keeping with Vedic tradition, a number of other Vedic gods share this same title, Prajapati. For over a century, various archaeologists and historians have suggested that the general concept of this Lord of Creatures was the subject of a well-known seal that comes from the Indus River civilization around 4,000 years ago. This rather small but compelling object of art was originally described as a proto-Shiva icon by the leader of early archaeological expeditions on the Indus River, a European. The suggestion seems rather fitting on one level, since the seal bears the image of either a sage or some sort of divine human being who assumes a cross-legged posture known in yoga practices as the lotus position, Padmasana, while overtly displaying what seems to be an erect phallus. A diverse array of charismatic creatures of the Indus River valley surround him, including an elephant, a water buffalo, rhino, and tiger, which conceptually identifies the human figure as the lord of these creatures. All these animals, one might expect, are mentioned on this or that occasion in Vedic hymns. And yet, many modern Sanskritists dismiss any notion that the Indus River civilization was Aryan in origin or Aryan in character in any way. These historians often doubting that the Aryans ever even came into contact with the Indus civilization, even though members of this civilization and Aryan bards clearly overlap to a certain extent in historical time and place. Western students of Indian prehistory are those that tend to reject the notion that Aryans lived among the Indus River cities at this time period, while many Indian historians assume that this cross-legged man bears all the hallmarks of an Aryan god. Whatever the case, the debates and mysteries that surround the historical origins of Vedic culture spring from our limited understanding of prehistoric life in this region of the world. And no doubt, the present contributions to the subject of Soma will likely add a little more fuel to the fires. Since there is little consensus as to what the early scriptural records of the Indo-Aryans are actually all about, these hymnals continue to generate as many questions as opinions. If, as is usually the case, a modern interpreter of Vedic records feels disposed to understand Agni primarily as the flames of an Aryan fire altar, or understand Indra to be an anthropomorphized thunderbolt, or Surya as the personification of the sun, then the Soma plant is naturally going to be relegated to a more ancillary position in the Vedic pantheon. Alternatively, if a reader of Vedic scriptures, such as myself, interprets Surya, Indra, Agni, cosmic serpents and bovids as symbolic aspects of the primary object of Vedic devotions, which is, of course, a psychotropic plant that reveals the veritable source and nature of creation, well then, I think the Vedas actually begin to resonate with one another. This novel approach to the interpretation of the Vedas identifies a plant god as a sun god, as a storm god, a fire god, based on this plant god's solar, aquatic, and pyrogenic characteristics. But of course, the symbolic relationships are reciprocal. So the gods of the sun and moon are thought to be simultaneously manifestations of the flower, but as heavenly orbs. Still, one way or another, Soma Pavamana is a first and universal principle of Aryan cosmogenesis. Soma is, after all, Prajapati. In the 10th and last chapter of the Rig Veda, a section of the hymnal that is considered to be a relatively late addition to the original, the first 9 chapters of the hymnal, several new and hitherto unmentioned or unknown creator spirits join the ranks of the Vedic pantheon. So these gods are really accretions now to the mythic tradition of the Aryans. Each of these divine newcomers to Aryan mythology shares divine characteristics that are suspiciously similar to those of Soma. Prominent among the new arrivals to the Vedic scene is Hiranyagarbha, whose name means the golden Hiranya, womb, Garbha. This primeval source of the living world is equivalent, at least conceptually, to another new god in the 10th chapter named Visvakarman, meaning maker of all, and also with another titled god, Tad Ekam, meaning that one, the one and only source of all that we can see and therefore know. These new arrivals share all the standard features of a Soma plant. Although hymns dedicated to these new deities seem to place more emphasis on the transcendental qualities of these gods as a mysterious source of the plant rather than the plant itself. All 3 of the aforementioned creators, and in fact, there are more, are described in terms of a primordial golden womb that arises from an aquatic abyss upon an umbilical prop, a pillar, that bears a central hub, or what some hymns refer to as a navel. This navel supports a sun-like, revolving, pyrogenic, all-seeing and all-knowing eye of omniscience. So, I ask our listeners, does any of this sound familiar? Welcome to the Vedas. While hymns entitled Tad Ekam, that one, pretty much sum up this god's role as a sole progenitor spirit, songs that are dedicated to Hiranyagarbha, the golden womb, expressly suggest this god's close connections to Soma. For, as I said, Hiranyagarbha is born in water, where all the gods first behold each other at the dawn of creation. A brief excerpt of the Yajurveda, the Titiriya Samhita, describes Hiranyagarbha as follows. You, when referring to the golden womb, are the surface of the waters, the birthplace of Agni, the primeval ocean swelling on either side, growing to might as the lotus flower. So you extend in width with the measure of heaven, the womb, Garbha, of being and non-being, Sat and Asat. The golden womb first arose, was born the only Lord of creation. He supports the earth and sky, and also the serpents in the atmosphere. In the sky, to those serpents, homage. So here, the sacred lotus itself is explicitly defined as a primordial golden womb, the source of all that lives and dies. But Hiranyagarbha is identified as a male deity, even though a womb is female. Or alternatively, in an oft-quoted hymn of the Atharva Veda, the 7th hymn of the 10th chapter, to be specific, Soma's proverbial pillar, here entitled the Skambha, as though this cosmic pillar was the god, the title of the god himself, is identified as the support of this golden womb, of a womb that contains within it, potentially, all 33 devas of the heavens. I will quote here a brief excerpt from Panikar's translation of this extended chant of the Atharva Veda, just to give you a feel for another translator's take on these mysterious verses. Men recognize the golden womb as the unutterable, the supreme. Yet it was the Skambha, the pillar, who in the beginning poured forth upon the world that stream of gold. In him exists no darkness, no evil. In him are all the lights, including the 3 lights that are in the Lord of Life. The one who knows the reed of gold standing up in the water is truly the mysterious Lord of Life. So clearly, in both name and form, the supportive pillar of the golden womb is Soma, because the Skambha stands like a reed of gold amidst the floods, just like the plant god. The hymn proceeds to inform us that, as it rises, the Skambha and the womb assume a covering of gold that bears the eye of the sun and the moon, as well as the mouth of Agni, these representing the triple lights of Soma, sun, moon, and fire. Then the cosmic reed itself is given the title of Brahma. Here we are introduced for the first time to a new Vedic creator god, Brahma by name, identified as the source of all the gods and of living creation, much as Brahma would be known, in fact, for the next 3,000 years as Brahma is known today. Because Brahma, in classical and medieval mythology and iconography of South Asia, is recognized in derived Hindu schools of religion as the sole, lotus-born creator of the cosmos. And so, given that the Yajurveda and Atharva Veda identify this golden womb explicitly as a lotus flower, a pushkari, a pundarika, or perhaps a little less precisely in other hymns as an apam pushpa, flower of the waters, which no doubt refers to India's sacred lotus, the mystery of the Vedas is actually revealed forthrightly. It turns out that the earliest known stone sculptures of an Indian lotus goddess appear from out of the blue in the archaeological records of India some 2,300 years ago. And they convey the notion of a female source of creation in rather exacting detail. These reliefs decorate a burial chamber of the Buddha's bodily remains at Sanchi on the Deccan Plateau of central India. Iconographic imagery that surrounds this earthen tomb focuses in large part on subjects that represent members of the Vedic pantheon, which is wholly in keeping with Buddhist tradition. Here the goddess's ample childbearing hips, essentially her womb, are equated with, are placed upon the golden receptacle of a lotus blossom, whose form suggests the image of a Soma Kalasha, a round vessel of Amrita. She sits upon her floral yoni, her womb, the golden flower, from which the essence of life will pour. This goddess can hardly be distinguished from most Brahmanic goddesses whose titles and prototypical features come directly from Vedic verses. The famous Hindu rivering goddess named Sarasvati, for example, represents a personified form of the famous Sarasvati River in the Vedas. This prehistoric body of water, the Sarasvati River, was identified in countless verses as a source of Soma plants, and her banks were considered to be an auspicious site on which to perform the Soma sacrifices. During post-Vedic eras, this riverine goddess, Sarasvati, was recognized as the consort and also the female aspect of the god Brahma, whom, as we know, is a late Vedic creator god. He too is Padmayoni, born of the lotus plant. In this sculpture, the goddess presents a kailasha, a Soma vessel, in her lower hand. And the vessel is decorated with lotus petals on its surface. One of her uplifted hands displays the creeping rhizomes of a lotus plant and a flower, while the other presents a palm leaf text of the Vedas. And from above, the voluptuous goddess is illuminated by a radiant, sun-like lotus flower. So, her general form and function in Hindu mythology, based largely on Vedic verses, is practically the mirror image of another lotus goddess, but in classical Hindu iconography, known as Padma, Lotus Lady. This would be Sri Lakshmi, the famous consort and female alter ego of the Vedic sun god known as Vishnu. This early, 1st century sculpture seems to equate her lactating breast with lotus blossoms, which she offers up generously to her devotees. No wonder her name is Shri, meaning abundance. A very closely related earth goddess in the Rig Veda is known as Aditi, the unbound, literally, presumably because she releases from her body her sun-like offspring, the Vedic Adityas, sons of Aditi. She shares all the attributes of Hiranyagarbha in Vedic verses and is identified mythically in the Vedas as a riverine mother of Soma, Indra, and Agni. Soma, the bull plant, is said to inhabit the green pastures of her rivers, for she, like so many other Vedic goddesses, is also described as being a milk-producing cow of the waters, cow of the heavens. This prehistoric goddess has been worshipped by a number of Brahmanic communities under the name of Laja Gauri since the 1st century. The standard form of this fertility goddess, iconographically, presents herself in a birthing, if not a coital position, posture, while bearing the head and face of a full-blown lotus blossom. Kind of nice in a way, but then again, a little spooky. Her exposed vulva is referred to as a yoni in Vedic mythology, and yoni is also a Sanskrit term that refers to a lotus flower, a divine throne or seat, a cosmic source of the gods, and a yoni refers to the mortar stones on which soma stems are pressed. And note how the goddess is positioned in such a way as to equate her broad hips with the golden womb of her lotus flower throne. Under the title of Aditi Uttanapara, she can be interpreted as the mother of all lotus flowers, or conceptually as a cosmic and golden womb that receives the Vedic seed of creation from a male deity to conceive her riverine progeny, her 7 sun-like children, the Adityas, that rise from her waters. These essentially are the equivalent of the proverbial 7 sages of Indo-European tradition. In the Rig Veda, Aditi sometimes assumes a human form, as she does here in this iconic portrayal of the goddess, by spreading her legs in Vedic verses to deliver from her body the so-called 2 world halves. This expression referring, as we know at this point, to the earth and sky. Here we have another example of Vedic conflation then, where she shares the divine role of separating the earth and sky with a role that is normally attributed to Soma Pavamana. Not only does Aditi give birth to the earth and sky, she also produces an aquatic son from her cosmic womb. For example, in a hymn dedicated to Soma, we are told, "When the sky gods like magicians caused the world to swell, Aditi delivered the sun that was hidden in the ocean." This would be the same ocean that Soma emerges from. In this context, Soma, of course, then, is the sun, and the cosmic ocean are the vast waters of the Indus River and its lakes and tributaries. Perhaps her greatest claim to fame is being the mother of Indra, the famous wielder of a cosmic bolt, the Vajra. And curiously, the Vedas say that Indra is born from the side of Aditi's body, without passing through, then, her yoni. Of course, she is mortal. But this death is a mythic twist that is never actually given an explanation in the hymns or in any other document for that reason. But so it is. She dies after the birth of her bolt-wielding sun god's son. In other verses, she is celebrated for suckling her divine offspring with her immortalizing milk. Yet another standard Vedic theme she shares with, of course, Soma. To quote, "Like fresh milk poured by Aditi, Soma vanquishes malignities." And, desiring food, Indra came unto his mother, and on her breast he beheld the pungent Soma. The golden womb of creation, Hiranyagarbha, or by whatever other name this deity might go by, does not simply generate the universe and then step away. No, the golden womb, which we now know was equated with a golden lotus flower, proceeds to set the world in perpetual motion, as though it were an ever-turning chariot wheel of the sun, this being another familiar theme to us at this point in the discussion. Ever turning, once this wheel is set in motion at the dawn of creation, it is available to sacrifice as though it was Soma, but under the name of a title we're familiar with, Prajapati, the Lord of Creatures, whose sacrificial body becomes the solar cycle of a year. But a mysterious chariot wheel, this one, because this solar vehicle operates, as we noted in earlier references to Soma, on a single wheel and a single axle. And the wheel has 3 hubs. A single wheel with 3 hubs on a chariot. Very strange chariot. To quote the Rig Veda, 12 are the thellies, and the wheel is single. 3 are the naves. What man has understood it? Therein are set together 360 spokes, which in no way can ever be loosened. These 3 hubs rotate on a single upright axle, the aksha. This would be Soma's wheel of Dharma, of course, later to become the Buddha's wheel of Dharma. Most translators interpret a full revolution of the sun's metaphorical chariot wheel as a complete solar revolution, since the 360 spokes of the wheel, as described in the Rig Veda, presumably relate to the 365 days of a solar year, and those 12 thellies apparently and justifiably are seen to represent a yearly complement of lunar cycles. Fair enough. But as earlier noted, the allusion to a 3-hubbed wheel derives from the solar aspect of Soma, the sacred flower, which bears an outer ring of petals, a middle ring of hundreds of golden sun-like rays, and a single golden sun-like disk in the center. Another Sanskrit term for the Brahmanic world wheel is mandala, which can also refer to a complete procession of time, whether it's an annual time cycle or a world eon of cosmic time, which was known in classical Hindu mythology as a Padma Kalpa, a lotus cycle. Mandala also refers, of course, to a popular style of sacred paintings that is executed in the round, in the guise of a lotus blossom, usually surrounded by deities, Brahmanic, Aryan deities. Mandala paintings have long been employed as objects on which to meditate on the transcendental meaning of Brahmanic and or Buddhist concepts of cosmic order, especially among religious communities in the Himalaya Mountains. One classical style of mandala painting portrays the wheel of life in the form of a lotus mandala. The flower's chakra, its hub, representing a motionless point, whereon a male and female creator spirit, representing dual and gendered aspects of a singular source of creation, assume a blissful conjugal posture and set creation in motion around the unmoved hub. A 20th century Nepalese lotus mandala of this type essentially translates Vedic verses into a cosmogram. By placing a multi-hubbed flower, its centralized chakra surrounded by a multicolored radiate array of petals, inside a felly of stylized lotus stems that circumnavigate the divine source of a calendric year. In the context of a solar cycle, the periphery of the lotus mandala portrays seasonal changes in the valley of Kathmandu. The 8 surrounding ellipses representing recurrent windows of time, with verdant summer scenes observed in the upper regions, and the drier, moribund winter scenes in the lower regions of the mandala. In the prehistoric Atharva Veda, the creative world wheel is identified explicitly as the water's flower, the apam nupushpa. To quote, "I ask thee where the water's flower, the apam pushpa, by wondrous magic art, Maya, was placed. Thereon the gods and men are set, as spokes are fastened to a nave." 8 devas are observed in this mandala, emanating from the nave as 8 spokes, each occupying a seasonal window of time in the outer belly. This is, of course, the same chariot wheel that exudes the essence of creation, the liquid essence of creation, and grants Brahmins the ecstatic sensation of immortality. Vedic bards once chanted, while abiding in the enlightening presence of the gods, "I turn this prayer in my heart as a turner of the chariot wheel. Have I not drunk Soma?" Soma's chariot wheel signifies simultaneously the perpetual movement of life and the permanent, everlasting powers of the Creator, who abides above and beyond the movements of the cosmos in the center of the world wheel. This causative principle, or agent, if incarnated, of the universe, embodies then the concept of one that moves and moves not in Vedic verses, a metaphysical theme that is also symbolized by the swastika. So the transcendental mover and his moving creations are aptly symbolized by the physics of a rotating wheel, which moves rapidly about the felly and yet remains stationary at the hub. The Aryan sun god Surya, whose solar wheel is described as the everlasting soul, Atman, of the universe, is one such Vedic god that moves and moves not. Just as is Agni, whose cosmic solar eye is born recurrently as a womb of the waters, an Garbha, and also the source of all beings. And this womb rotates perpetually about Agni's unmoved navel, his Nabhi. So the Sanskrit term Nabhi, the navel of the world wheel, is symbolic of a personified creator spirit's navel in Aryan iconography, from which extends the support of the golden wheel in the form of a supportive umbilical cord. As seen here, one of the first iconic images of the universal navel in India's archaeological records is a navel that engenders, in fact, flowering lotus stalks. This navel of the gods is a feature of many members of the Vedic pantheon, including Soma, for one, who is identified as the earth's navel when he sustains the heavens, or Agni, who serves the same function when his pillar, also Soma Skambha, is identified as the navel of the earth. Or in like fashion, there is Aditi in her watery home, and she too is a cosmic navel that creates the living world. Just as Soma, Surya, and Hiranyagarbha, as the souls, that is, the Atman of the Soma sacrifice, share roles as the proverbial navel of immortality and the navel of sacrifice. This concept of a first and universal soul is also connected to the Vedic creator spirit, Brahma, known as Brahma, and he's lotus-born. So, how can we deny that all of these deities, all of them embody the same cosmogonic principle and or agent under different names? And symbolically, they all converge on one floral symbol, the sacred lotus of the East. As time passed, the popularity of Indra, Soma, and Agni during prehistoric times was eclipsed by the god named Brahma around 2,800 years ago, during an age that gave rise to the philosophical text known as the Upanishads. Brahma, the personification on the lotus flower, golden, lotus-seated, as a cosmic principle that represented Brahman, a transcendental source of Brahma. We see him here as seated, lotus-seated God with four heads, his divine and all-knowing eyes casting their gaze across the four quarters of space, much, I might say, as the omniscient eyes of Vedic Soma. And within around four more centuries, around 2,400 years ago, the popularity of Brahma gave way to a relatively minor god of the Vedas known as Vishnu, seen here in his man and serpent form, Narayana, who sustains the lotus stalk on which Brahma is seen in the central flower. While all of these deities have some sort of defining role in Vedic and classical mythology, they clearly represent manifestations of the same creative principle in Hindu theology over the ages, over the years, even at present. All of them essentially as alter egos of one another. As we will find in our episodes on Hinduism, Brahma and Vishnu are considered to be dual aspects of the same god in classical mythology, both sharing the prehistoric titles of, and they do this individually in the scriptures, the titles of Hiranyagarbha, Visvakarman, Ekam. And they share those titles even in the present age. Whether in script or in the visual arts, the sole plant that has ever been identified as a cosmic navel, wheel, sun, serpent, sunbird, or cow, all originally Vedic metaphors and symbolic creatures, represent, in one way or another, the sacred lotus of the East. This is the only plant in Indo-Aryan history that has ever been identified with the concept of transcendence, bliss, material emancipation, and spiritual enlightenment. And since Brahmanic seers, sages, and pundits have always acknowledged that the Vedas establish the foundations of all beliefs and practices of their Aryan brotherhood, and since the lotus is hands down the common symbolic denominator of the entire Vedic pantheon in Indian history, well, it seems clear to me that the lotus is Soma Pavamana, the ancient Indo-Aryan pillar of Vedic Dharma. So, to sum things up, what we have explored today is no more than a brief, and I should say shallow, dive into a profound and very poorly understood chapter of human history, of the history of religion. A chapter in the history of civilization that has influenced and guided the spiritual lives of perhaps half of the human souls that have ever walked the face of the earth in one way or another. The Vedas give us a fragmented account of early Indo-Aryan beliefs and mythology because the Vedas are primarily comprised of hymnals, not mythic texts. They provide as much context on the traditions of early Brahmanic communities as, say, a Baptist hymnal encapsulates the doctrine and life history of Jesus Christ. Since the Vedas contain little in the way of theological discourse, we must turn then to a different class of religious texts to flesh out the religious views and doctrines of Vedic poets. These works emphasize over and over again that there is but one creator, the first and only universal principle that is the true essence, the soul, the spirit, the Atman, of every living creature that has ever arrived, lived, and perished on paradise earth. This theological precept derives from a turn of mind that recognized one soul as actually the soul of God, the Creator, the Immortal One. You are a manifestation of this one soul, in whatever name or form you have. Or to express things in the words of the ancient Rig Veda, we have drunk the Soma. We have become immortal. We have seen the light. We have found the gods. What can the enmity, what can the treachery of mortal man do to us now? O mortal one,